Welcome to meeting number 82 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injury. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. With regard to speaking lists, the committee's clerk and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking list for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses appearing virtually will have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. They're actually going through that process, so there's two speakers who have yet to be cleared. But I just thought in the interest of saving time, we would get started. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022 and Tuesday, May 30th, 2023, the committee resumes its study of the situation at the Russia-Ukraine border and implications for peace and security. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. As an individual, we have Professor Jennifer Clapp. We have Professor Jeffrey Wood from Western University. We have Mr. Timothy Egan, who's familiar to us, having previously appeared here. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Gas Association. And lastly, we're grateful to have Anna Ackerman, who's a policy analyst and green reconstruction of Ukraine specialist with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. So, Mr. Egan, given that you are here, you will go first. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has been over 18 months since Russia's illegal and vicious attack on Ukraine. It has been over 1 month since Hamas's monstrous terrorist assault on Israel. And Asia is on high alert as communist Chinese rhetoric and action suggest the integrity of Taiwan is at risk. Conflicts are raging and more threaten. The world is unstable, a grave concern for us all. Its effect on energy, it means energy matters more than ever. Energy is the lifeblood of functioning modern societies. It is the foundation of economic well-being and is essential for national and international security. It always matters, but all the more so in moments of instability. And Canada has energy in abundance, particularly natural gas. My association is the voice of Canada's natural gas industry. Our members are responsible for nearly 40% of our country's energy needs, almost twice that of the electricity industry, serving 8 provinces and 1 territory. And since before Confederation, Canadians have been using gas energy, and over 20 million benefit from it today. More still across the country want access to it. Natural gas is the largest single contributor to our residential, commercial, and industrial energy needs. Canada is home to world-class companies in natural gas production, transmission, distribution, and in services to the sector. And Canada is at record production and consumption levels of natural gas, and the numbers are growing. And now we have an enormous opportunity to help the world. Canada should commit to making more of its extraordinary energy resources and technologies available to our allies. The world needs and wants energy, and for the most part, it isn't discriminating on what kind. There does remain some discrimination as to the source, and one source the world would like more energy from is Canada. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, my offices have had meetings with representatives from across Europe and Asia, and all have asked how to get more natural gas more quickly from Canada. They know our environmental standards are high, our governance standards are high, that we have an extraordinary abundance of the resource, and that if they had a comparable abundance, they would be developing it quickly. Yet they see us as seemingly incapable of delivering in the way they would expect us to deliver. And this needs to change. Canada should step up and do more. In an unstable world, a concerted Canadian strategy to help on energy is both an opportunity and a responsibility. We have hundreds of years of supplies of natural gas and a producer industry more than willing to get it to market quickly and efficiently. What are we doing to ensure that that happens? We have global expertise in the movement of gaseous fuels across great distances safely and reliably. What are we doing to work to take this to the world? We have efficient and transparent regulatory regimes for the distribution of energy. What are we doing to take these to the world? And we have extraordinary innovation in how we manage the resource and its use, including the development of alternative gaseous fuels like renewable natural gas and hydrogen, and are working to develop more. What more can we do to bring this to the world? Parliamentarians should sit down with industry to craft answers to all these questions. Consumers of energy care about three things: whether that energy is reliable, whether it is affordable, and whether it is acceptable. Under the third of these, acceptability, a primary focus for many years has been environmental acceptability, particularly in respect to emissions. But global insecurity has forced a necessary step back from an exclusive focus on environmental acceptability and a reflection on how all three legs of this energy stool are kept stable. Natural gas energy, consistently one of the most affordable, reliable and acceptable in countless applications, is particularly well positioned to help address all three for the world, as it continues to do for Canada. While the CJ is primarily focused on domestic concerns, we represent Canada globally for the gas industry in the International Gas Union, and recently hosted the global industry's biggest liquid natural gas conference, LNG 2023, in Vancouver. We're about to host the world's biggest conference on gas technology and innovation, IGRC 2024, in Banff next May. All of this speaks to how we are apprised of the role of gas globally and what we see as great promise. There are reports about how we are trending towards a decline in the use of fossil fuels, but the evidence on the ground suggests anything but. Moreover, in the course of human history, rare is it that we stop the use of any particular fuel or energy technology. Rather, we add more and improve the use of all. This is the likely future of natural gas in the world, and Canada, given the comparative advantage we have in supply, in infrastructure, in expertise, should lead on this for Ukraine and for the world at large. Approximately a decade ago, our industry worked with government in Canada and the United States to assist the Ukrainians in strengthening their gas infrastructure at a time of serious threat from Russia. Those threats have manifested themselves in terrible ways, and the help we provided then should be built upon, and we should do more now. In conclusion, I should note that we don't speak about gas to the exclusion of other fuels or technologies. We think all are needed for a more prosperous and a more secure world. But we see an enormous opportunity for immediate and profound benefit from natural gas not being realized, and we think it should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egan. We now go to Professor Clapp. Welcome, Professor Clapp. The floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to make 3 points in relation to the global food security consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, drawing on insights from my own research as a professor at the University of Waterloo and in my role as a member of several international expert panels on food security. The first point I want to make is that world food security has been profoundly affected by the decline of Ukrainian wheat on the world market. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine caused significant turmoil on global grain markets, which resulted in a major price spike that came on top of higher food prices that were due to disruptions to markets caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The price spikes were due to concern about global grain supplies because Russia and Ukraine at the time together accounted for 1/4 of the world's wheat export market and 1/5 of the world's maize market. And of course, Russia is also the world's largest fertilizer exporter. Food import bills rose sharply around the world, hitting food import-dependent developing countries the hardest, especially countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East, many of which relied on imports of grain from Ukraine and Russia to meet their food security needs. The result was a dramatic increase in global hunger. After a decade in which we saw hunger falling...
Apologies, Ms. Clapp. I think there's a point of order.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, on a des enjeux.
Yes, Chair. We're having some difficulty. There's some issues with the interpretation.
Everything okay?
Sound quality went down during your The problem is it's always my...
Apologies, Professor Clapp. We were just advised by the interpreters that the quality of your sound went down. So hopefully that will not happen again. We will now proceed with your testimony again.
Apologies. I hope it sounds okay now. As I was saying, the result of these price increases was a dramatic increase in global hunger. So after a decade in which we
Professor
saw
Clapp, my sincerest apologies. Just got another signal from the interpreters. For some reason, things are not okay. So because there's two other witnesses that have to be checked as well, someone will be getting in touch with you right now. We will suspend for a few minutes and then hopefully resume, and you can carry on with your testimony. Our apologies for that. So I'll just suspend for a few minutes because they still have to go through the sound check and everything.
Mr. Chair.
So we will resume our meeting today. Mr. Egan, thank you very, very much for your patience. Very grateful, but it's important that we all agree on the process going forward. So we have had the opportunity to hear your opening remarks. We will now go to the members for questions. Each member is allotted 4 minutes. So if you're getting very close to the 4 minutes, I will put this up. I'd be grateful if you could kindly attempt to wrap up as soon as possible once you see this sign being held up. So that having been said, we first go to Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Egan, for appearing in front of our committee. On March 23rd, 2022, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Prime Minister set up a dedicated working group on two things: the green transition and liquefied natural gas, to develop concrete actions to deepen Canada-European Union cooperation on energy and to end EU dependence on Russian energy. Since that working group has been established about a year and a half ago, has your industry or your members had any workings with the Government of Canada and this working group?
No, sir.
Okay. I note that Russian pipeline flows to Europe have stopped, but Russian natural gas, liquefied natural gas, continues to flow to Europe. The top 3 LNG suppliers to Europe are the United States, Qatar, and Russia. To what extent, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of last year, has the Government of Canada worked with you or your members or your industry, the natural gas industry, toward the goal of increasing Canadian LNG exports to the European Union?
We've had no direct engagement with the Canadian Gas Association with the Government of Canada on that. I can't speak for any specific engagement that may have occurred with individual companies.
There are some analysts in Canada who have said that Canadian LNG is not the answer to the European Union's short-term energy needs because of a, quote, fundamental mismatch with Canadian supply opportunities, unquote. These analysts have also said that, quote, Canada cannot ramp up supply before 2025 while Europe's energy needs will largely be resolved by that time, end quote. In other words, Europe's LNG requirements will be completely solved by before 2025 in 2 mere short years and 24 months. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I don't. And in fact, Canada is a significant supplier of natural gas to the United States in quantities that are roughly comparable to the amount of gas the United States is currently exporting to global markets, much of which is going to Europe. So in fact, Canadian gas is playing in global markets and could be playing much more in global markets. The European crisis continues. Europe continues to look for gas on global markets, and I believe there's a significant opportunity for Canada.
Mr. Egan, do you follow the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook forecasts at all?
It's one of the variety of international sources that we do look at, yes.
Would you agree that the IEA's forecasts often have been way off? I remember 10 years ago in 2013, the International Energy Agency saying that global coal consumption had peaked and that it would decline from 2013 onwards. A decade later, we smashed through new global coal demand last year, and all indications are that in 2023, this year, that global coal consumption will break new record highs. They have also made similar predictions about oil, but yet oil demand continues to rise globally. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the accuracy of predicting peak oil and peak natural gas demand that we've often seen in the last decade that often have proven to be wrong.
I'd say it's not just for the last decade. I'd say since we've been using oil and natural gas and other fossil fuels, we have consistently underestimated the availability of those fuels, in large part because it depends on the price of the fuel and the state of the technology at any one time. And what we consistently demonstrate is that there is more product available, often at more affordable prices than ever conceived of before.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we now go to Madame Chatel. You have 4 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Egan, and thank you for being such a brave and patient witness today. I'm looking at a report from the OECD. I only have the English text in front of me.
The impact of the war in Ukraine, and they have 3 key recommendations. The first, in a bit of a context, they say that the gas price has significantly increased as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine and are likely to remain elevated in the medium and even long term. And they say as European country increasingly switch to other gas supplier. In this very important situation, they have 3 recommendations. The first one is that support regions that are specialized in energy-intensive sector in order to help them adjust while requiring them to find suitable long-term solution that fit their local context, specifically support measures that include promotion of energy efficiency, investment in alternative energy sources, or training or reemployment of displaced workers. The second recommendation is to commit to excluding coal as an alternative energy source in order to remain in line with the vital need to transition to a net zero emission economy by 2050. And lastly, to support manufacturing upgrading in particularly economically weak region in order to bring up the energy efficiency of less efficient companies so that the sector role best practice. Could you comment on these 3 recommendations? Does that align to Canada's energy sector and their interaction with this situation in Ukraine?
I'd say broadly there are elements of the OECD recommendations that are aligned with actions by our industry in Canada. We are strongly supportive of energy efficiency. We're strongly supportive of alternative gaseous fuels. As I noted in my remarks, we're big supporters of renewable natural gas and the development of hydrogen. We're some of the leaders in the development of hydrogen applications in Canada. We're strongly supportive of efforts to reduce emissions overall. But at the end of the day, consumers in any country, be they residential or commercial or industrial, need access to reliable and affordable energy. And in times of crisis, they will take any kind of energy they can. That's why we've actually seen forests being depleted in Western Europe. That's why we see Western European countries suddenly and dramatically changing their policies and importing coal and developing new coal facilities. That's why we see all of those things, because fundamentally every citizen, every society needs access to energy. And Canada can play a key role in providing clean and affordable and reliable energy to the world. And we should, I think, avoid any effort to pick favorites, and we should think about what our strengths are and play to them and try to provide support to our allies however we can. And I believe natural gas is part of that.
And I've seen a massive investment in Europe in clean and renewable energy. In the context, do you think that Canada is a short-term solution to Europe, or how do you think this sector plays with the increasing investment in renewable energy in Europe?
Gas sector?
Very briefly, please, because we're over 4 minutes.
First of all, most renewables cannot be implemented without access to natural gas. It's a core partner for the development of virtually any renewable. Secondly, as much as there's been significant renewables investment, they're extremely costly. And the development of natural gas assets is significantly less costly in virtually every application. So it's an all-of-the-above approach where you look at all of the key factors, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. 4 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Egan, for being here today. And I thank you especially for your patience. It's very much appreciated. There is a report that deals with emissions plans, and it was said that those plans for reducing emissions were clearly insufficient for reducing GHGs by 40% by 2030. The gas and oil sectors are part of the economic drivers of Canada. That they would represent 23% in 2005, and in 2021, it's somewhat less. The members of the committee were told in November 2022 that the Canadian gas industry should collaborate with the government to direct more energy offshore. How do you say then that this goal that you seem to have in mind, that is to say, sending more energy offshore to offshore zones, and that with the fact that Canada can't meet its goals with respect to the reduction of GHGs, and given the fact that the war with Ukraine has had a pronounced effect on energy needs in Europe. There has been a cessation of fossil fuel, if you like, being transported there, but there are other types of fuels. Do you not believe that now the oil companies should take this, and also the natural gas companies should take all of this into account and turn a new leaf?
I think Canada faces a serious challenge. We've set very aggressive targets, which, as you've noted, are unlikely to be met. But we have at our disposal extraordinary resources that could be used to help meet, I would say, broader emission reduction targets at a global level. So, in the domestic context, if we're having difficulty, and very recent reports indicate that we are, to meet targets that have been set by the Government of Canada for 2030 or 2050, we could be contributing to global efforts to reduce emissions and thereby have a net positive impact around the world, if not quite the opportunity we wanted to achieve, or the objective we wanted to achieve within the domestic context. So, for instance, we're having conversations with Asian countries that are very interested in bringing in natural gas, which could be used to offset higher emitting resource uses and thereby reduce emissions in those countries. And we should be working, I believe, to find ways to ensure that the net emission benefit comes to us and can be counted against our own targets. Similarly, even within North America, I look at your province, Monsieur Bergeron, and I look at the fact that it's got one of the most significant hydro assets in North America, which has delivered extraordinary benefit not just to Quebec, but I'd say to much of northeastern United States. The opportunity to continue to develop that project in those assets in an efficient way often depends on the cooperative development of natural gas assets for the efficient use of energy, for the efficient operation of energy systems. And the concern I have is the suggestion that it is one or the other. I believe that it is an all-above-the approach, and similarly, it's not one or the other in terms of Canadian emission reduction targets and global reduction targets. We should be working with our allies around the world to reduce emissions globally in as cooperative a fashion as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Yes.
We now go to Madam McPherson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I mentioned, I was eager to hear from our witnesses about food insecurity that's been caused around the world because of the conflict, the illegal war in Ukraine. And unfortunately, we're not able to do that right now. I'm sorry I don't have any questions for you, Mr. Egan. But I did want to take my 4 minutes because, there is a concurrence motion happening in the House right now that was on a report that was tabled in February of last year. We know that our Natural Resources Committee is being filibustered by the Conservatives because they also don't want us to be able to get anything done there. They also blocked a unanimous consent motion I asked for today in the House for unanimous consent for a ceasefire for the people of Gaza. So I thought what I would use my 4 minutes to do is read the press conference from leading Canadian humanitarian organizations that mark the 1 month of violence in Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank.
There's a point of
and
order.
call for an immediate
Madam
ceasefire.
McPherson, there's a point of order. Yes.
Relevance, Mr. Chair.
Yes, could you speak to the relevance?
Of course. So the relevance is that food insecurity around the world is caused by what is happening in Ukraine. That's very, very clear. And one of the places that it is most happening right now is in Gaza. We are seeing food insecurity in the Middle East. We know that it had huge implications on Lebanon, on Palestine, and so I think there is clear relevance. You know, obviously right
Can I
now
ask that you make it as relevant as
the Conservative
possible?
Party
Make
doesn't
every
want me to
effort
talk
do so.
about the 4,324 Palestinian children who have lost their lives. Doesn't want me to talk about the 1,350 missing children under the rubble in Gaza right now. But unfortunately, this is my time to talk about food insecurity, and so I will be talking about that in Gaza. Since October 7th,
In relation
unprecedented
to
violence in Gaza,
Ukraine?
Israel, and the West Bank has resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe. Thousands of civilians, including children, are being killed, and with millions more suffering as a result of countless attacks, relentless bombing, hunger, dehydration, sickness, and the absence of clean water, fuel, health care, and humanitarian assistance. While the organization and local partners providing some immediate
Madam
assistance to civilians
McPherson,
on the ground.
if I could just once again remind you that there should be some relevance to the study of
Food and fuel.
Ukraine.
Point of order on that same
Yes.
point. I would be supportive of Ms. McPherson continuing. There's a long tradition of members being able to use their 4 minutes as they wish, and that the relevance is always somewhat tangential at times, and I've heard that many times. However, I think it is the member's right to take that 4 minutes. And I hope the clock is stopped right now so it doesn't interfere with her 4 minutes. I would say I'm supportive of it because, as she mentioned, there is a concurrence motion that the Conservatives have presented in the House of Commons which stopped the debate on S9, which was a bill that I thought we had agreement on that would be an important bill to get through the House quickly. And we are now stopped on S9, which is about chemical weapons and the warfare and updating the list to try to keep our planet safe. So as Ms. McPherson said, we have interrupted the House. It is a piece of business that was to come to this committee. And so it is, I think, of interest to all of us. So I would like to hear Ms. McPherson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. Ms. McPherson would ask that you try to make it as relevant as possible to the study that we
And I was speaking about food and fuel and the impacts on the citizens of Gaza. One thing I would also like to highlight is currently the member for Fort Saskatchewan Sherwood Park is filibustering the Natural Resources Committee, where we are trying to get a piece of legislation through that would help Albertans with jobs, and perhaps the energy sector would be more applicable in that particular circumstance. Day by day, hundreds of innocent civilians are being killed in ongoing violence. The following organizations urge the Government of Canada to take a strong and resolute stance in demanding a ceasefire in order to prevent further loss of civilian life and to allow for the delivery of critical humanitarian assistance. CARE Canada, Cooperation Canada, Development and Peace, Human Concern International, Humanity and Inclusion, Islamic Relief Canada, Oxfam Canada, Oxfam Quebec, Médecins du Monde Canada, Mennonite Central Committee Canada, and Save the Children. And to quote, "The lives of 2 million people are at stake. The healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing. Hospitals are devastated and lack the capacity to treat the tens of thousands wounded." Mr. Speaker, Canada should be calling for a ceasefire. I'm disappointed that both the Liberals and the Conservatives refuse to give consent for that ceasefire motion in the House of Commons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam McPherson. Mr. Egan, thank you very, very much. We're all very, very grateful that you're here in person and you had an opportunity to share your expertise and insights with us. Very grateful. So I will now suspend for a few minutes because we have to go in camera to do committee business. So it should take about 3 or 4 minutes. Meeting stands suspended.